Here he is,
Hello, good to see you.
Dr. Warren Farrell. So good to see you.
Thank you. I was looking forward to this. You
Yeah,
seem
me
like
too.
At least seems like you put together a really good podcast and right up my alley.
Oh, thank you, mate. That's so kind of you to say. I've been admiring and appreciating your work for a little while now. I just finished your book, The Boy Crisis, only just the other day, actually.
Oh, neat, neat. Did you like
Yeah,
it?
I loved it. Yeah,
Oh,
actually, I'll tell you the truth. The opening pages of the book where you were mentioning things about the moments that the boys valued in their fathers, and the moments that the fathers were recounting the times in their life where their relationship with their father meant the most.
mhm.
It brought me to tears. I go to a cafe every morning, and I walk my dog along the beach, and then we go to a cafe. She sits beside me. I have a coffee, and I either read a book or listen to a podcast, and I usually do both. So I'm sitting there in the cafe, and I'm reading the opening stories and crying. I'm even getting emotional just talking about it. I was like,
Oh,
yeah, it brought me to tears, and I was just thinking about like the relationship that I had with my dad when I was younger. Man, first time I've ever cried on a podcast. Thanks, Warren. Um, and also because I've got three boys, so I was just thinking about the, the times that I've had with them. The moments that I've had with them, from the moment that they were conceived to to the moment they were born to the moment that like now they're sort of like 18 and 14 and 12. So anyway, you made me cry. Is what I wanted to tell you. So
what
appreciate
what
you.
what would you say, Adrian, are the moments that most touched your heart or most um, turned around your priority system
Mm.
in life?
I mean, there was a paradigm shift when I had children, and
Yes,
so you certainly see the world in a different lens, and it starts to give you meaning and purpose and contribution for somebody else that you've only just moments ago met, but you would give your life for them. Like
yes,
it's almost like an unwritten rule or a law that is just embodied immediately, and you're like, you know what, I would die for this little human being. And
yes.
that's one of the pivotal moments. But I'll tell you a story if you don't mind.
Yeah. Please.
So when the boy's mum, like my ex-wife and I, so when the boys were conceived, we were in the obstetrician's office, and um, my firstborn, and we had to do this thing called a strep B test. And so the
The what?
doctor's like, it's called a strep B test.
Okay.
And so the obstetrician said, here, you take this swab and, swab it around your area, and bring it back to me. And then she's like, I don't think I can do it. My belly's so big, I can't reach. And so I said, I'll do it. And then we went and did it. We come back, and the obstetrician says, he shakes my hand. He says, like, mate, I just want to congratulate you. You're the first husband that's ever offered to do anything like that. And I said, I'll deliver them if you'd let me. And he said, would you like to deliver them? And then, like, um, we're looking at each other, and she's like, are you fucking serious? You're like, is this really happening? And I said, I would love to do that, So anyway, the moment comes, and we're in the delivery room, and I looked at the obstetrician, and I said, hey, listen, you know how you said like I can deliver, right? And I said, are you serious? And he goes, yeah. And I had this kind of moment of like, we're on, right? We're on. And he goes, yeah, we're on. So he says to the nurses, like, get this guy gowned up, put his gloves on, all that kind of stuff. So now the baby's been born, he's been delivered, and so I get the chance to grab him as he's coming out, and then and pull him out, and then cut the cord and all that kind of stuff, and then hand him to his mum. Warren, I have never
Wow.
been so moved in my life by that moment. I delivered all three boys. I mean, like, not myself, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes, yes, I
so
know.
I
In
had
hand,
that moment three times, and it's almost like when they gave him to his mom, and then she nursed him for a little bit, and they took him away and cleaned him up, and then they handed him back to me. And I, spoke to him and just said, like, hey, beautiful, like, this is your dad. And his eyes went straight to my eyes, like basically met me, right?
Wow.
So it was just, and then I blubbered. I was just a fucking mess after that. I couldn't hold my emotions back, and I was sobbing to
Yes.
this, little miracle that was in my arms. So anyway, that's my
That
story.
is really so powerful and so beautiful. And my goodness, if you weren't crying, I'd be shocked, right? That's you
Yeah.
have me almost on the verge of tears here. And it really I don't know if you remember reading in The Boy Crisis where I talk about the dad brain. Do you remember that part of it at all?
Yeah.
And you know that we all think of a motherhood instinct, and there is such a thing as a motherhood instinct. That the brains, the neurons in a woman's brain when she's pregnant and has a child, they connect very differently and more fully. But almost no one knows about the dad brain, which is a whole set of potential neurons that have the possibility of connecting when a child is born, and and then they connect differently or more fully if the father perceives that his role is to is involves being with the child as opposed to doing what I call in the boy crisis the father's catch-22. And the father's catch-22 is the belief that once the child is born, the way that you love the child is to be away from the love of the child. For example, instead of being a local salesperson, you become a national salesperson, and so if you live in Sydney, you're flying to Perth, and so you see the child maybe on weekends or every other weekend, and so that still creates a bit of this dad brain that's your responsibility, but not as powerfully as if you perceive your role as being involved with the child and maybe earning a little bit less money than you would if you were that national sales representative, but that you make it that internal decision that this child, this second child, this third child are the most important things in your life, as well as in your case, your wife.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And look, I don't want to take away anything from the bond between a mother and child. I think that
Oh,
those formative years of them growing up is super important. They need each other, and it's one of those things where it breaks my heart when I see some couples that feel like financially they have no option but to hand their child over to a daycare center or something like that from 6 or 8 weeks or 3 months old, that sort of thing. And then they're basically being raised by another mother, or
yeah.
it's one of those things which I think is it's a true value of mine, and something that, despite the economic impacts, that's what we did. So the kids didn't really go to preschool for the first couple of years of their life. It was only when they were 2 or 3, probably more
Yeah.
3, when they started to get introduced into preschool. But yeah, like, mum stayed home for 8 or 9 years, I think, before she went back to work. She was actually working for me one day a week I used to own a real estate office. And so, and then I had Wednesdays off. So Wednesdays was my daddy daycare day. And that was kind of like, some of the things that we implemented, but it's certainly impacted us financially because you didn't have two people working and all those things. But again, that's just my values. That was something that I wanted. I always wanted to be a young dad, and I always wanted to have like more than 2 kids, and and I wanted to have mum involved straight away. And I said that from the beginning, like, this is what the way it's going to be. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's just wonderful. And you probably remember reading in the Boy Crisis, the Harvard University longitudinal study, the only 80-year longitudinal study of what creates happiness. And they found that in families of four, that if the couple is earning about, in the United States, it was like 70 to $90,000 a year, that depending on where in the states they lived, that that amount of if they're earning that amount of money, that after that, what creates happiness is time with the family and with children. That the first 70 and 90,000 is helpful very essential for survival. And but after that, the additional monies that people often focus on making, and having $1 million a year or whatever, those do not, even the people who are doing that successfully do not end up ranking themselves as happier.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that it doesn't discount that it is harder to do. I mean, I think I've always been in business for, or at least for the last 25 years. So business, as you would appreciate, is no mean feat. Sometimes it can be feast or famine, So
Yeah.
there are many times where you think like, maybe it'd be better if I just get a safe, secure job and something that's, like a bit more comfortable. But I think at the end of the day, I my mission was accomplished, which was to spend more time um, with having more time with mum and dad, and when our kids were young. And so a lot of the things that I really did was prioritize taking them to sport and to activities and being involved. And to be honest with you, Warren, like it was a chance for me to relive my youth. Like I couldn't wait to watch Disney movies and cartoons and ride skateboards and scooters and all that kind of stuff. That was like a part of me that really got sort of lost in my children. But probably some of the things that I want to ask you about, because you mentioned before there's the dad brain, right? And
Mhm.
one of the things that was certainly apparent for me, because you get to the point where now my values have changed. Family is my number one value. I really want to make sure these kids have the best out of life that I can possibly provide for them. And so the very value of family is juxtaposed by the fact that you want to work so much in order to provide the life that maybe you never had when you were younger. And so then you end up in this paradox of like, I'm working really hard to make sure that my kids have everything they want, but then you end up in a situation where I am actually modeling the type of person that just says to them, because like kids learn between the ages of 0 and 7, their personality and their character traits and things like that. So they start to model that being a good dad or being a loving father means working hard and being away from the
Mhm.
family all the time. And then you have this sort of self-perpetuating thing where that's all you're teaching your children, is to value working hard. And then no one ever gets to live or enjoy or be in the moment or be present, all those sorts of things.
Plus, you're doing your children a great disservice, which is to give them everything they want. It's really important for kids to be able to not have everything they want and to be able to have to work for it and set priorities and decide which things they can and they can't have. And it's those are and when it comes like you if you have a swimming pool at your house and you have a beautiful home, and the kids, neighbors and friends are coming over and using your swimming pool. The kids on some level don't know whether they're liked because they have the swimming pool at their house, or they're liked because of who they are and what their emotional intelligence is, and the other fine qualities it takes to make their friends feel appreciated and paid attention to, and so on. And so one of the, I hope, did you get to that section in the Boy Crisis where I talk about the differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting?
Yeah,
Did,
I sure
did,
did.
did that ring true for you? The roughhousing, the teasing, the encouraging the children to take risks, that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It was so true for me, because the roughhousing and all of that kind of play was something that I really loved. And the cool thing, I mean, um, we never had any girls, so like, the cool thing about having boys is it's almost, and I know you speak in your book that roughhousing for girls is also in important as well. But having the boys, it was my opportunity to kind of introduce that playfulness and all those sorts of things. But I remember being told like not to be too rough, and you know don't do things like, I don't know, like biting, or these sorts of things which were sort of frowned upon, or don't rile them up at night. It was kind of like, you get home from
That's
work and they greet you. It's almost like it's like a puppy when you leave for 5 minutes and you come back and it's like the first time I've ever seen you. So the kids will run and they want to play. And the great thing was is that we could do that, but typically after dinner was kind of like that time. So yeah, that definitely resonated with me because like, don't do this because they won't go to sleep on time, and don't be too rough because then they will be rough with other kids, and that was the kind of difference between dad thinking and mum thinking, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's, the typically speaking, for example, you might throw your three sons on the couch and say, okay, the game here is for the three of you to pin me down before I can pin all three of three of you down together. And the kids are super excited, and the mom is looking on and saying, oh no, it's, too late at night, and oh no, somebody's going to get hurt, and I should really interfere, but on the other hand, I don't want to be controlling and interfering. And so she's caught, and she's sort of saying to herself, this is, I feel like I have only one more child to monitor, and the father, and and so and then sure enough, you get into that rough housing and so on, and somebody, one of your sons maybe sticks an elbow in the other one's eye, and it gets too aggressive, and somebody does get hurt, and then mom is saying, I knew it, but at least now, Adrian will get it, that he's getting too rough, but you don't get it. You just say, what are your sons' names?
Sebastian, Isaac, and Lucas.
Yes, you might say, to Sebastian, don't stick your elbow in Lucas's eyes, and Sebastian will go, okay, okay, I got it, and Isaac will say, yeah, sure, and then 10 minutes later they get really excited, and somebody Isaac sticks his elbow or something else, and it hurts one of the other brothers. And so and the mother can't believe that you've gone back to this after not having you didn't learn your lesson, and then you say something like, okay, no more roughhousing tonight, because I told you what you couldn't do, and so you're enforcing the boundary of no more of not being too rough, and what the difference is between being aggressive and assertive.
Mhm.
And but you say, all right, so we're not going to do this again until a few days from now, if you finish your homework and do everything else, really right. And the mother's going like, what? Twice in a row this happened and you haven't learned your lesson? And the sons are, but what has happened is that what the research shows is that what you've done in stopping the roughhousing when they disobeyed your statement that there's no being, as to what the difference is between being aggressive and assertive, is that you have told them that there will be no more treat, the roughhousing,
Mm.
if you violate, if you don't think of your brother's feelings and their needs, and you hurt them in order to win. And so they're beginning to learn empathy, not because they wanted to, but because it's like a puppy dog. The puppy dog doesn't do what you want until it knows it's going to get a treat if you do that. And so your treat is the roughhousing that you're giving the puppies, your children. And they then learn that, okay, if I pay attention to brother and sister's feelings and I'm not too rough, and I get that this is what dad says is aggressive and this is assertive, and faking out that you're going to move one way and then moving a different way, that's fine. And so you're learning you're teaching your children all these subtleties of how to win, but also at the same time think of someone else's feelings besides yourself. And so the data showing that children who are roughhoused with by their father or their mother leads to more empathy is like so counterintuitive.
Mm.
But it's so important for men to know what they do that contributes to the welfare of the child, what they tend to do naturally, and that same type of phenomenon there. In that example, the father is not just setting a boundary, but enforcing the boundary. The difference between setting boundaries and enforcing boundaries is very much confused by people. Mothers will be much more likely to set boundaries. So when the children are left with a father and with a mother, and the mother sets a bedtime that's earlier than the father sets the bedtime. But the data shows that the children actually get to bed earlier with the father because the mother will, let's say it's 8:30 is the bedtime, and at 8:30 one of the kids comes to mom and says, "Mom, I'm so sorry don't have my homework done. I don't want to go into school tomorrow, without my homework completed." And mom immediately empathizes and says, "Oh, well, you could have done it before, but I definitely don't want you to go into school without it being done." So the child learns, aha, I can manipulate this. So children with mothers who set boundaries but don't enforce boundaries, or fathers that set boundaries and don't enforce boundaries, uh, they learn to become manipulative to a much greater degree in order to get what they want, and then they lose respect for the parent who they can manipulate, because you never respect the person you can manipulate. And
Mm.
so, and then they're also learning in this example about roughhousing, they're learning postponed gratification. They're learning that immediate gratification is I want to push my brother out of the way and win. But if I do that, I lose what I really want, the roughhousing, to continue. So I have to postpone my gratification to get the real victory of what I want. And postponed gratification is the single biggest predictor of success or failure in life. But no dad knows these things, and moms can't hear what dads don't say.
Mm.
And so for me, one of the purposes in writing The Boy Crisis was just being able um, to help dads understand that what they do intuitively, just like what mothers do intuitively, they each have purposes. And that the parents who do best with the children are ones that have what I call checks and balance parenting, where they both share what the value is of what they're doing, and then they figure out a way of getting the best of both worlds for their children.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. So, is part of the answer that mums and dads need to appreciate that their parenting styles are different, and the way that they are as individuals in terms of one being male, one being female, they certainly have a different perspective and view on raising children. So one might be more nurturing, one might be more sort of stricter in their upbringing, or those sorts of things. I mean, is part of the answer that mums need to be more like dads, or is the answer that they need to respect each other's values with respect to parenting? Because a lot of what you just said is like, yeah, mum comes in as the fun police, right? That was like the thing in our household. Stop all the rough housing. I told you were going to get hurt, and now you did, and all the rest of it, and then it stops.
Mhm.
So, on one hand, like I could have said, no, you don't know what you're talking about, and we're going to roughhouse all we like, and all the rest of it, and then, or I could say, which what it usually was like, okay, kids, how about we just call it quits for now, and we'll come back and we'll do it a bit later, or whatever it is, but to appease mum, like in terms of not being an asshole, or showing my kids that mum doesn't have an opinion, or doesn't have a voice, or anything like that.
Right.
So what do you say to
That's
that?
that's where, if the last 30 years I've been doing couples communication workshops, these role mate to soulmate workshops, and you may have heard that I just came out with a new book called Role Mate to
Yeah,
Soulmate.
you see behind you.
And yeah, that's right. And the so the crucial thing there is that when you have differences, you set aside a time each week that I call a caring and sharing practice. And you would hear, did I hear you say at the beginning that you're divorced at this point?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. You would at the time before you were divorced, you would see that maybe first of all, you read and inform yourself about the positive value of what you're doing. You share that, and it's only partially heard. But at least what the mother knows is that you have a reason for doing what you're doing, that it has a positive outcome for the children, often which ones that she didn't know about. And so the dads need to do their homework, and then they need to share with the mother these things. But oftentimes, when they are shared, they're still not heard very well. So that's where I set up the caring and sharing time, where you would first hear her perspective on or vice versa. But before you hear her perspective, you um, you meditate into an altered state to be able to associate whatever she's going to tell you with an opportunity to provide, to provide her safety and security with whatever she wishes to tell you, even if you completely disagree with it, even if she exaggerates it, even if she lies about something, you're making it secure for her to share that. And then you, after you've created that security, your first mindset, for example, might be saying out loud to her um, what I call the love guarantee. And the love guarantee is if I provide a safe environment for your feelings and no matter what you say or how you say it, you'll feel more secure with me. And if you feel more secure with me, you'll feel more loved by me. And if you feel more loved by me, you'll feel more love for me. And so then she knows, and this is just one of six mindsets. I don't want to go through the whole list of them there. But then she knows she has a safe place to be able to say whatever she wants to say. And you have, through these six mindsets, prepared yourself to be able to be completely supportive of her. And and if you learn to attach to her ideas and her feelings and not and what to do if you lose that attachment to her feelings and you begin to form in your own mind something that I call self-listening, and you begin to say, oh, I have a response to that, or that's not really accurate.
Mm.
And I ask couples to use the word hold the second they start listening to their responses rather than listening to her, or and vice versa if it's her listening to you.
Mm.
And then before you do that, you appreciate each other a couple of times at five levels of specificity. And then at the end of the whole process, you appreciate each other again two more times at five levels of specificity. And once one of you has had a chance to share and go through that whole process, which is a 24-step process, and it isn't simple,
Mm.
but it just keeps marriages together and people really understanding each other. And then if you still have differences, then the next step is how to work out win-win solutions to difficult problems. So for example, don't, if you feel if your sons want to climb the tree in the backyard and mom says, that's too dangerous. You can't do that. Maybe in 4 or 5 years you can. And so, and then you have done some reading and you realize that climbing trees helps people assess risks. What's safe, what isn't safe. In order to assess those risks and be out of their comfort zone, they increase their IQ. And so you explain to mom that this is really important, but mom says, yeah, that'd be really important. It's very important to have a really bright child who falls from the top of the tree and is killed. So that might be slightly sarcastic on our part, but so the checks and balance parenting would be the two of you working it out so that yes, the children can climb and the tree in the backyard, but not beyond a certain point. And you need to be out there underneath that tree. So in case one of them falls, you'll be there to cushion the fall.
Yeah.
And I can do this as long as you agree to give me your cell phone so you don't get preoccupied with that and you pay attention to your son.
Mm.
And so, all right, then what does the child get? It gets the opportunity to know how to take risks and which ones are too much, but it doesn't get it at that level of falling from the tree and getting a concussion or a severe concussion or a spinal cord injury or dying.
Mm. Man, I wish I had that level of self-awareness when my kids were younger. And I think that if most individuals had their own self-awareness and also the ability to communicate on that level, I mean, a, a lot of marriages would stay together. I'm sure you would agree.
I would very much agree. I was inspired to write to do the course to begin with because I saw that there was the courses that existed in couples communication were saying things like when criticism that don't be defensive in response to criticism, and everybody was agreeing with that wisdom in the workshop, but then they'd go home and when the criticism appeared, the wisdom disappeared. And so I said, well, and then I started realizing that historically speaking, when you heard criticism, it was a potential enemy. And so it was made sense to get up your defenses so you wouldn't be killed by the enemy, or even alternatively, to kill the enemy before the enemy kills you.
Mhm.
And so, and that was functional for survival it's just totally dysfunctional for love. And
Mm,
so before so I said to myself, I don't want to be doing workshops that just are repeating the same thing that other workshops are doing. Can I invent a way to be able to get around this biologically natural propensity to be defensive in response to criticism? And I worked for years to try to get that way. And when I felt I could, because it was natural to be defensive, I had to figure out a way that was something that was unnatural that you did. And so I started to develop these mindsets that people could meditate into. And then for 30 years, I gave people free follow-up phone calls to tell me which mindsets worked, which ones didn't.
mm.
And this is just one of 23 love enhancements. And so they gave me feedback about what did and didn't work. And I kept dropping what didn't work and, implementing what did work. And so that's what led to this.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I really like that sentiment of that self check-in, and whether it be via meditation or any other form of self inner dialogue, which is important in terms of not just with respect to listening to what the other person's saying and not yourself, but that self check-in before you go ahead and have what could be called, a confrontation. Because typically when you're speaking about polarizing views on parenting, then you've got two parents that typically have never had the conversation as to what type of parents they want to be prior to having children.
Yeah.
And now you've come to that situation with less charge
Yeah.
and with less expectation of what the other person's going to say, and more openness to receiving information, which is kind of difficult when you're the type of person who wants to just prove a point and
Mhm.
be right. So Anthony Robbins used to say, would you rather be right, or would you rather be in love? And that was a really good quote that stuck with me
Yes. Yes.
throughout my life. Although you could argue that maybe I wasn't as self-aware as I should have been growing up. And but then again, like
Well, Adrian,
raising kids, Warren, is like one of those things where you're learning on the go. You've also learned from usually bad role models who only did the best they could with the knowledge that they had. And so I think that at this time in my life where I'm 46, and I feel like I'm only get to knowing myself for the first time, and the relationship that I am starting to develop with my children is amidst the separation and things like that, because things haven't been easy on them or us. So we're now sort of meeting new grounds, which are kind of exciting and difficult, and all the things in between. So yeah.
yeah. How old are your sons?
Nearly 18, 14 and 12.
18, 14, almost 18, 14, and
Yeah,
12.
yeah.
Boy, that's so many. Do you have them half the time?
Yeah, I do, and it's something I really fought for. So it's really important to me that I have influence on their lives, and it's really important that I can show up as the dad that I always wanted to be. And so
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've really fought for that,
Mhm.
and that's something too. Like I'd love to talk to, because I know it can be seen quite negative, but look, I've discovered you recently, and I'm sorry to hear that, and sorry to say it as well, but it's just like, but I've had the same sort of sentiments and thoughts around men and women, and I guess the way society has kind of manipulated and coerced men into thinking that perhaps because of what's between their legs, that they were this oppressor, and we've got to pay the sins of our forefathers and things like that. But when it comes to marriages, and when it comes to divorce, and when it comes to separation and kids and things like that, um, in the last 4 years going through it myself, you tend to meet people and going through a similar thing. It's almost like when someone in your family dies from cancer, and you mention it to someone and they say, oh, my auntie died of cancer. And all of a sudden you don't realize how many people have freaking died of cancer in the last 12 months. Everyone's got a story. So when you
Yeah.
go through a separation and divorce, and particularly when it's not good, I'm
Mhm.
not sure if they ever are, but it's not easy, and there's a lot of bumps and things going on. You talk to people and they're like, yeah, I've been going through it, or I went through it several years ago. But one of the things that really grinds me, Warren, is that like a friend of mine that I used to go to the gym with many years ago, we see each other every now and then. So he's kind of like, passing by. I see him in the gym, and he mentioned that he was going through a separation. It was really, really hard on him because his kids were young and they were maybe both under 10, from what I can
Mhm.
understand. His partner or ex-partner was making it very difficult for him to see the children. It eventually got to the point where they were led to believe that their dad was a bad man, and they would say things in as far as I know and what I've heard, like, we don't like you.
Mhm.
And he was in his 50s, and he got to the point where he couldn't handle it anymore, and he
He committed suicide.
decided to leave the planet and leave his kids. He just couldn't do it. This guy was he's a really nice guy, beautiful guy,
Yeah.
really pleasant nature. Just did all the things that we've been speaking about through this conversation about just wanting to provide the best life for his family. But it
Yes.
got to the point where the option of not living anymore was better than being told by his kids that they didn't want to see their
Yeah.
father.
They didn't like him. Yes. Boy, this is a universal, I'm afraid, in all developed countries where people have the privilege of being able to divorce, as opposed to having to stay together forever. And this is the basic breakdown. Women have the right to children, men have to fight for children. And it's the most dysfunctional process possible because the children suffer enormously with only one parent, especially after a divorce. It's so important for the children to have the love and the protection and the different styles of both parents' upbringing. It's one of the most heinous acts of child abuse is bad mouthing the other parent in front of the children, and leaving because when the child looks in the mirror and sees, if your son looks in the mirror and he hears, that, oh, dad is irresponsible, dad is a liar, dad is a narcissist, or whatever. That child looks in the mirror and sees, oh, I have the nose, the ears, and the body language of my father. Maybe I'm a narcissist. Maybe I'm irresponsible. Maybe I'm a liar. I did lie a few weeks ago to so and so. And so the child begins to feel that it's not just a criticism of the father, but it's a criticism of him, if it's a boy, or her, if it's a girl.
Yeah.
And so it's really this is so damaging. If there's any one law that would do more good for children, fathers, and mothers, the law would be that the right of children to have both parents after divorce, um, assuming that neither one is abusive or molesting or anything like that, the child, but under normal circumstances, and the need for both parents to be pay consequences if they're sharing children things about the other parent in front of the children, that are not positive. And so when I say it's a win-win situation, this isn't just rhetoric. When I was met the woman who's my wife now 30 years ago, but after a divorce, of a marriage that lasted 11 years or so, I had a period of about 20 years where I dated different women, and I dated mostly women who had children. And the word that those women used most frequently was the word overwhelmed. And I always liked responsible women. And the women oftentimes felt that they couldn't do their job outside the home effectively enough. They couldn't do their job with the children effectively enough. They felt guilty. They felt overwhelmed. And so having the man relieve some of the burden and the joys of raising the children, can leave the children that, all right, during these 2 weeks, I can focus on my work outside the home. During these 2 weeks or this week, I can focus on the children without guilt. That's a bit, fathers having equal time with the children after divorce is by far the best thing for the children, the data shows. And it's also very good for the mother. This should be considered a woman's issue. That after divorce, the father should be expected to take responsibility 50% of the time so that the mother doesn't have all of the pain and all of the joy alone. And so there's very few situations where that are win, win, win or lose, lose, lose. And this is one where the children lose, the father loses. And, as far as your friend committing or quasi friend committing suicide, um, men going through custody battles are 8 times as likely to commit suicide as women going through custody battles. And one of the reasons is that the custody system in almost all developed countries is so biased in favor of women that the man has to prove himself. And the problem is that to prove yourself, it takes money. And the men who are earning enough money to be able to prove themselves in court are oftentimes the ones that have the least time for the children and so it is the levels of dysfunction that are involved from this process. And so, one of the things I talk about in the Boy Crisis book is, the legal issues, the parenting issues, the listening issues are mostly in the wife and the roommate to soulmate book, but all of those have to be put together, because if you know how to hear your partner effectively, the chances are much less that the divorces will happen to begin with. And also your children, even if you do divorce, are having you two as a role model for what their communication process is like. And children pick that up amazingly intuitively. And as we all know, children of divorce are far more likely to get divorced themselves, oftentimes because of the communication that they observe is not as good as it ideally can be.
Yeah. Look, I think having those conversations post divorce and separation is probably, if just as critical as whether you're in a marriage or not. I think
Mhm.
when you think of yourself as a role model and you're like, I've got these little eyes on me that are seeing not only what I say but what I do. Like, how congruent am I with the things that I say? What are the kinds of actions um, that follow the words that come out of my mouth, and that to me is like more paramount in a separation, because they get to see how mum and dad can behave like adults and work through the situation, albeit difficult, that has their best interests at heart. Like an argument that I've always had is like, our whatever happened between us or between the married couple is between the married couple. It's got nothing to do with the children. But now we need to create some synergies and work in alignment with each other in order to raise these kids in this new environment and new surroundings the best way that we possibly can. And so when you shift the purpose away from just looking after yourself and your self-interest, and you put it into the interest of your child or children,
Mhm.
it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It takes the angst away from the fact that she was a bad wife or he was a terrible
Mhm.
husband or whatever it may be, and you've got your personality differences. It now is like, we've still got a common path, we've still got a common goal. These kids are most often very young, and we've got all these milestones ahead of us. Like, it's in all of our best interest to be um, cohesive and to be at least on the same path as meaning that we're going to prioritize these children as the the people that we should give the most attention to,
Yes,
as well as looking after ourselves in the process.
absolutely. One slight modification I would have is that I think it'd be wonderful if, like, when you're doing that caring and sharing practice, if you say to the children, Mom and I have some differences about this. We're going to show you what we do in this caring and sharing practice to be able to both leave each other feeling really heard. and how we're going to appreciate each other first, and then hear each other's perspectives on things, and then leave each other feeling share more appreciations at the end, and leave each other feeling like so that both of us walk away from this process feeling really heard, so they don't feel like you're so couples that keep all their differences to themselves oftentimes, and the children don't see a differences being expressed. Oftentimes when they get into their own marriage and they have their first argument, they think, oh my God, my parents never argued. This must be, this is a disaster. We're not really meant for each other. There's something
Mm.
wrong. And they have no tools to process the argument effectively.
Right.
Um, and it's not just the caring and sharing practice, it's also knowing how that's 2 hours a week. It's also knowing how to set up a conflict-free zone for the other 166 hours a week. And that is so that once you know that your partner can really hear you, if you get a criticism during the week, you can visualize that I have two options here, as I can respond to the criticism, usually with another criticism in reverse, or conversely, I can take it to the caring and sharing time and have 100% chance of being really heard about what I'd like to say. And so what your kids start observing is, one of you throws out a criticism of the other, and the other one chooses to visualize taking care of that later and not just escalating, and each of them attacking each other back and forth.
Mm. Yeah, that's awesome. Aaron, with when you mentioned before about the imbalances and the court systems and the things that are sort of heavily skewed towards the mother, and the system is, in my opinion, like very broken. And I am not immune to sounding conspiratorial when I say that I think that it's almost by design that we're removing fathers away from children. When you look at, and I've heard you speak to this before, I was listening to a podcast with you. I think you were talking to Jordan Peterson about the declining sperm counts in males, and you've got this sort of uh, trajectory of the male species that are becoming more feminized and more effeminate over the last 20 or 30 years.
Mhm.
So the things that sort of rub me up the wrong way, and I have debates and conversations with certain people about these things, and I often get labeled that I've got, like, I'm either a misogynist or I have a distaste for women. It's almost like I want to prove that they're wrong, and I guess I want to sort of shy away from that sentiment, but maybe come with some evidence and some factual sort of background, because, like you said before, you've got men committing suicide at an alarming rate. Men that are divorced that commit suicide at a higher rate than than women. You've got the depiction in the media, though, that, for example, here in Australia, probably every other week to every month or so, there is a news story about a man killing a woman. And
Mhm.
so it sets the interwebs off in a spiral, because they're like, the Me Too movement, and there things around abuse. There's a Netflix movie that I noticed just the other day that's all around toxic masculinity and abuse towards women, but there's never really much of a counter argument, which is the abuse towards men.
Mhm.
And like my friend who, I'm going to say, at the abuse of a woman, decided to take his life, and that may not have been physical abuse, but it was abuse nonetheless.
Yes,
So,
yes.
is there anything that perhaps anyone listening to this might be dissuaded to think that maybe the landscape is not the truest depiction of the relationship between men and women, and when it comes to domestic violence or suicide or anything like that?
Well, first, it's really important to know the data on this. And back in the 1970s, of two people called Strauss and Gellis did the first big study of domestic violence, and they found that And so they interviewed women and men and asked, who was, did you ever hit each other? Who hit who first? And a whole series of questions about were you slapped? Were you punched? Were you hit with an object? Were you hit when you were asleep, when you were awake? And then the only one that could not be answered fully was who kills who more. But that is the answer to that question is by far and away the most interesting answer of all. But what they found, Strauss and Gellis found, was that women and men basically are as likely to be the first ones to hit the other one, and that every level of violence was about equal between women and men. There was, but men and women did some of the violence differently. Women were far more likely to hit a man with an object while he was asleep, like a pan or something along those lines. And because, which different ways of compensating for them on the average being physically weaker. But so the feminists just were up in arms and saying we're going to do a study to show that this study is wrong. And so since that point in time in the 70s, there's been close to 200 additional studies done. Now, to the credit of feminists and the credit of women, most of those studies were done by women, and most of those studies were done by women who were feminists. And they all set out to disprove this equality of hitting. And every single one of them found, with a little bit of different variation, but that men and women hit each other about equally at every level of violence. However, on the surface, it appeared that the men were about 50% more likely to kill women than the other way around. And so the feminists really focused on that issue. But as I studied it for a book I wrote called Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say, is when I studied it, I found that men and women kill each other very differently. Men almost always get angry and in fury, they kill their wives, and then they're so ashamed and angry that they kill themselves as well. And so it's very easy for the police to see the man killed the woman, and it makes, of course, the headlines. The other is not seen. When women kill men, they're far more likely to do one of two types of contract killings. If they're wealthy, they hire somebody. If they're poor, they have a relationship with a boyfriend, and what is always common to all the killings that women do of men is that the men have a will in which the money goes to the woman. And so the woman usually who's poorer promises a portion of or half of the money to the boyfriend, and they're oftentimes lovers, etc. And so the problem with both of those forms of killings is they're both contract killings, and the money from the will does not go to anybody if it's known to be a contract killing and that the killing was purposeful as opposed to an accident. So the killing by the hitman or the boyfriend and the woman has got to look like it was an accident and set up in some way, and then the contract is fulfilled. However, when there are about 10 times as many contract killings as there are women and men killing each other. But we don't know what percentage of those contract killings are based on this premise of killing the other one for the will. But even if it is so, the purpose of the contract killing is to not be discovered. So we don't know how many are not discovered. But among the ones that are discovered, they're listed by the FBI in the United States as a contract killing, therefore a multiple offender killing, therefore not the woman killing the man.
Uh-huh.
So you don't see, now it may be that 10 times as many women kill men, and it may be just a slightly more than, equal. But we don't have that data. at that level. We only know that the female style of killing is the contract killing that leads to, that has to be kept, that has to be hidden, that it's anything but an accident in order to get the money from the will. So those are just, just an example of, what I'm sharing with you now, virtually nobody knows. Before I did the research for Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say, I had not a clue of this. And
Mm,
so it was like, and this is, there are, in a hundred or so different areas, because women have institutionalized the caring about them in gender studies courses all over the world. They've come up with a portion of, a type of way of looking at things that does not that is not in balance. We hear all the time, that it's a we live in a patriarchy in which men make rules to benefit men at the expense of women. But then we see in the Ukraine that men are, between the ages of 18 and 60 are 16, I think, and 60 are required to participate in battle, and women show their defiance, and women are not required to do anything. They have the option to participate in battle, but they don't have the obligation or the necessity to do so. So women have shown their defiance by painting their nails to show that they are opposed to Russia. And this was recently highlighted in the New York Times as such bravery that the women are doing because, somebody could respond negatively to that or discover them, and et cetera. And, to say nothing of the men that were dying, are dying, have died left and right in the trenches in the Ukraine. And so this is female privilege. But female privilege is not even two words that are put together in a way that we've heard. But there's just dozens and dozens of examples of this that I discuss in the Myth of Male Power book, as you probably know.
yeah, I have yet to read it. You know, I can't get it here in Australia. I'll need to go onto your website, and the
Oh,
local bookstores here don't have it.
uh,
So
yes.
yeah,
When I when it first came out, I did a lot of publicity in Australia, and
yeah,
it became the number one bestseller in Australia,
I
and it
bet.
was published by Random House. And immediately, and somebody reported to Random House that this was, critical of feminism, and the second printing was stopped.
Wow.
Even
Wow.
even though the first printing put it on the
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. You're were a male feminist, that right? Yeah, that's
oh
your
yes.
trajectory into all of this was kind of supporting the women's rights movement. Yeah, so
Oh,
you would have
as a
experienced your fair share of pushback when you jump sides, so to speak.
Yes, and I don't consider myself having jumped sides. I've always believed that, when only one sex wins, both sexes lose, and I've always been a strong supporter of men and women. But at the beginning, I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City and spoke all around the world on women's issues. And so that was definitely my identity. And then I began at one point, I remember being at a board meeting of the National Organization for Women, and mentioning that, this was the 70s now. And I'm seeing the initial first data from all the divorces that were happening in the 70s, that children that did not live with their fathers or as well as their mothers, or that were what I came to call dad deprived, were not doing nearly as well as the children who had father and mother both about equally involved after divorce. And so I mentioned this to the board of now, and I'll never forget in my entire life the silence that just happened. And one of the women finally spoke up and said, Warren, we're here to support women's issues. And if a woman wants to be the one having the children after divorce, we have to support that. And otherwise, we'll lose membership, we'll lose money, we'll lose the ability to fight for any number of things that we're fighting for. Custody is not the only issue that we care about. And so, maybe you should do a bit more research because, Warren, most of your speaking engagements, maybe even all of them, come from feminist recommendations. And so, and my income was extremely good at that time. So when I decided to be as honest as I could and say whatever I found the data to be as I as looked at more long-term outcomes of children that didn't have their father. I started to write about that, and I knew that what I was doing was, losing, that I would be losing millions of dollars to do that.
Wow. Can I ask you, Warren, I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but from my little echo chamber of things that I see from the people that I guess, model from, learn from, and try and embody their views that are resonating with me, there seems to be a push towards not labeling masculinity as toxic. It's interesting when you Google toxic masculinity, it basically depicts a man who hates women. And when you Google feminine, like toxic femininity, it's also women just hating on other women. It's like it doesn't have any other connotations. Well, I mean, the internet's changing and evolving, but I think the point I'm trying to make is, do you agree that there is a shift towards men being more masculine and embodying their masculinity and seeing that as a positive trait? It's kind of like, what is the weak men create hard times, strong men create good times, all those sorts of things. And we are now seeing a pull towards this dominant masculine man who is, I guess, leading the charge and leading from the front, that sort of thing. But I wanted to ask you, because the depiction that I see with, say, for example, an example might be Andrew Tate, whereas this kind of like real dominant individual, he's all about power and dominance all the time. That's his whole thing, is like not taking shit from anyone, and that's his messaging.
Mhm.
When I think about a true masculine man, I feel like it's less about dominance and power, and it's more about the ability to have dominance and power and willing it where necessary, not as a means to just control everyone. So I wanted to get your opinion, because I see you as a truly masculine man, but you're not like a 100-kilo ripped bodybuilder, professional street fighter type of person. Do you know what I mean? Like you're
Yes, I am.
Got it. But like you're living your truth, for example, you're the author, truly like the author of your own story. And that's something that I admire the qualities within as a man. I look up to you in that respect. So yeah, I'll hand it over to you. I wanted to get your views on that.
Thank you. Yeah, in my opinion, there's clearly toxic masculinity and there's clearly toxic femininity. And men who play the Andrew Tate type of men who are sort of often make very negative comments about women, and are, have to, anyone that has to prove themselves a certain way, that need to prove yourself a certain way, or the need to hold on to an ideology as a form of identity. Those are all toxicities. When women use their beauty to be able to get from men a free dinner, or that's toxic femininity, and because it's manipulative femininity. It's not, and it's when women are trained not to ask out men on dates as often as men ask out women, that creates a type of toxic femininity, because the most important thing is for women, it's important for women to share the risk taking. Sharing the risk taking is what leads women, it leads to women being able to share risk taking in life, which leads to her being more likely to be an entrepreneur. One of the reasons that women are not entrepreneurs as much as men, or inventors as much as men, is because we don't give them the training from an early age to take risks of rejection. Every entrepreneur and every inventor has gone through multiple risks of rejection. And where can you learn that rejection better with greater vulnerability is when you're 14, 15, 16, and you're wanting to, and have an interest in somebody else from the other sex or the same sex, and you reach out and you say, and the school system and your parental socialization says to you, if you're interested in Adrian, don't wait for him to come to you. You come to Adrian, and ask him out. And why would you do that? Because historically speaking, the when a woman is happy, the family is happier and the man is happier. That's terrible, but it's also true.
Mm.
And so if children, if women, if men and women are both happier when the woman is happier, then the woman should, that's all the more reason the woman should be looking around to see who's the man at this party who has the body language that I really like, who's listening to women rather than talking down to women or dominating the conversation. This and who's asking the woman questions with curiosity. Well, if I notice that vibe, let me go up to him. And if we have a great conversation, but he doesn't ask for my phone number, let me ask for his phone number. In fact, don't even wait till he does or doesn't ask for my phone number. I'll just expect myself to ask for his phone number and make an arrangement for us to meet at another time. These are the types of risks that would deplete or mitigate toxic femininity. And with toxic masculinity, it is absolutely the price we paid historically to every every generation had its war, and in each generation's war, the equivalent of Uncle Sam, the government said you are needed to kill and be killed in this war in order to protect your country. And so people from Australia went over to, fight Hitler. And, many Australians' lives were lost, but they weren't lives only. They were men's lives that were lost. And and so in order to be willing to lose your life, when you go into, you went through boot camp and you went through other military exercises. And if the sergeant said to you something like, Adrian, if it may be made, let's say, an anti-Semitic comment, and if you happen to be Jewish, you might have said, or in your case, maybe anti-Italian comment, and if you happen to be that thing, and you said, "Gee, I didn't really appreciate that. My background is Italian, or my background is Jewish, whatever," and that felt really hurtful to me. The sergeant would say, Adrian, take 10 push-ups. And next time, take 20 push-ups. And you learned to shut your mouth about anything that offended you. And so what did you learn to do? You learned to keep your feelings to yourself, to repress your feelings, to not think about your needs. Why? Because the war machine does not work effectively with squeaky wheels. It works effectively with greased wheels where everybody does the same thing, everybody conforms. And so that repression of your feelings is what helps to create the PTSD, and you come home with this type of just being completely depleted when your best friend is killed, or you are shot, or hearing noises that haunt you for the rest of your life.
Mm.
And so but the learning to do the things you needed to do in order to protect women and to protect children created a type of toxicity. But that toxicity did not come from male privilege. It came from male obligation and male expectation and men's willingness to kill and, well, not willingness to kill, but requirement to kill or be killed. In the United States to this day, every 18-year-old boy has to register for the draft. Zero 18-year-old girls have to register for the draft.
Wow. Yeah, so well said. You can see too from what you were saying the imbalance in masculine and feminine energy. I think men have learned to shut up and be quiet, and at the at the risk of displeasing their wife in order to keep everything happy and harmonious, or their girlfriend, whatever. But then they become sort of more subservient in that respect, and more effeminate or feminized in to the degree where the woman feels like maybe she needs to make more of the decisions and more of um, the financial contributions and decision making processes within the house. So she sort of leads the charge, and therefore you have this imbalance, which I feel like that pendulum is swinging the other way, albeit in the Andrew Tate's example, it's probably too extreme. But I think the balance, like you strike me as the type of person who's very much in control of his emotions and his feelings, and can articulate himself in such a way that doesn't elicit anger or violence, and those sorts of things, and can have really high level conversations. And I think you can explain yourself to the degree where you feel like Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand, then be understood. So you have that ability to kind of do that, which most men should really develop those. I mean, every men and women, but most men in particular, because we've been taught to just shut up and don't cry. And although I've cried twice on this podcast already, can I tell you though, when we talk about violence and we talk about repressed emotions and things like that, my middle son Isaac was the typical like middle boy or middle child. So he was very similar to me when I was younger, sort of bit of a delinquent. Would fly from high emotions to low emotions and back again to high, very quickly. Was more of the argumentative, disagreeable type, and all the rest of it. And my sister-in-law said about a couple of years ago, maybe you should try and get him into some sort of sport, or maybe martial arts or something like that. So we chose mixed martial arts as a way to go down. And so I involved like two out of the three boys into it, whoever wanted to come along, and I joined in as well. So for the last 18 months, we've been training in mixed martial arts. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because my experience has been, especially via Isaac, his demeanor and the way that he carries himself as a young man is like remarkably different to what he was 18 months ago. Yes. And he would be labeled the ADD child, all that kind of stuff. Like that's what I would have been labeled as in the 70s and 80s, because I was just climbing trees and climbing the walls and disrupting everything that was in my path, right? So you would think that doing something that was violent in nature, that it would maybe make him more violent or more aggressive, or when he had his outburst, he was like uncontrollable, because he's not only angry, but he's also angry with a set of skills that can do some damage. But the opposite was true.
Yes.
He has all this ability to destroy anyone that's in his path, but he doesn't use it. It's like, I have the power, but I just know that it's there to call on if I ever needed it. But now that I know that it's there, I don't use it. I myself have experienced similar things. I used to be very emotional and like highly sort of like swung from either depression and anger and rage and hurt and worried and sad and all of those things in between. I used to balance between all of that all of the time. It's been much the same most of my life until a couple of years ago. It's almost like I know I have the ability to fuck someone up if anything was to go down. But through that process has made me calmer. I'm better with my children. I'm less quicker to anger. I have a longer fuse. I see things differently. And so anyway, I just wanted to maybe share that with you and get your thoughts, because my experience has been that what I thought it may do was the exact opposite of what it does. Yes. And it's had a profound effect on all of us.
The experience that most people have with mixed martial arts for their sons and or daughters is very positive. Exactly what you're talking about. That's almost universal. Boys seem to need to have when they master something and they create a discipline, and that discipline requires focus, and they become proud of themselves. They become centered in themselves, and that really is very helpful. You said something a little bit before that I wanted to clarify, though, which is talking about the men oftentimes keeping their feelings to themselves in relationships. And I want to make it clear that both sexes almost, when I do the couples workshops, I see that everyone feels that they're walking on eggshells. That women as well as men, everybody feels that the other one is in control, that they can't say what they're really feeling, because they'll only the other person will feel criticized, and then they'll come back and criticize them, and the arguments will escalate. The difference is that women are more likely to share that frustration with their women friends and have an outlet for it. men are more likely to repress it and drink or keep it to themselves, keep it to themselves, keep it to themselves, and then all of a sudden it all comes out in volcano form. And then and so that's the reason, I've created this role mate to soulmate work because it's so important that you were talking about me being articulate. And I've been fortunate enough to be articulate during my life. But in my first marriage, that articulateness was part of what hurt the marriage. I was able to express my feelings, but I didn't have the skill set to listen to my former wife's feelings.
Mm.
I did, but I did with the ability to self-listen or listen to my response while she was talking. So
Mm.
the degree to which I could articulate things so well really undermined our intimacy in a way, and that's what I've been spending the last 30 years doing is to my current wife of the last 30 years. She and I are in the opposites attract category. And if we didn't learn to really hear each other and understand each other's perspectives, we would not have the what is now a really extraordinary marriage. And so, but it's not come from my articulateness, it's come from my more refined, developed recently listening skills.
Mm. Yeah, that resonated with me a lot. That was pretty much my entire marriage, I think. So, yeah, there is a dance. Look, I really appreciate your time. I think what I wanted to say to you is that I was just thinking that I discovered you, I think, from a documentary called The Red Pill.
Oh, yes,
And
right.
um, and so that led me down the path of eventually getting to your work. So I really appreciate the way that you succinctly and thoroughly think through certain situations and events and things like that. I think that there's a real knack that you have in terms of in an unbiased way, just explaining the facts of what the reality is. This is what is on the news. This is what is on the internet. This is what has been written and talked about. But here's what the reality of what's going on. You strike a chord within me as a man and as a man with a father of three sons. So
Mm.
I just wanted to commend you and praise you on your work. I've only got through one book. I've listened to endless podcasts that you've been on. So I definitely want to go down the path of reading your other work and getting to know your work a lot more. So I appreciate you. And for those that are listening and maybe have not heard of you before and want to find out more about you, where's the best place that they can find you?
My website is warrenfarrell.com. I couldn't remember anything more complicated, so they gave it to
Yeah.
an easy one. And the Farrell is FARRELL.com. And the book I'd really recommend the most, but not just for reading, is the Role Mate to Soulmate book. And I also have to, probably you'll never hear another author say this, but the book is okay and valuable for some insights to be read. But the real job, but there's an almost free, um, what do we call it, online video course that will allow you and your partner to practice all the exercises in the book. And the when relationships really get better, they don't come from reading a book. They come from practicing, in this case, practicing the exercises for the 20 different love enhancements in the book, and then practicing them again, and then practicing them again as you would when you go to the gym. And if you're not really, if you're just going to read it, you'll get some wisdom. It may help you here and there because only a certain percentage of that wisdom will stick. And so you'll feel very enlightened after you read the book. But the truth is that it takes the practice and the repractice to develop the skills to really know how to love well.
Mm, perfect. Warren, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I really appreciate your time and I value you so much. I hope that perhaps sometime in the future we can circle back and go a little bit deeper into your new book, Role Mate to Soulmate. I'll have to put that on the list of books to read. So I appreciate you, and thanks again for your time.
I really appreciate you. You come from the heart. You really have gone through the experience. You've lived life, and you've really worked out of your heart and carry through with your sons. And your sons are very, very fortunate. And thank you for putting up the fight that you needed to put up in order to have equal time with them.
Yeah, thank you, mate. I really appreciate it. Until we meet again, I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, absolutely.